So I started giving these Saturday morning talks on A Course in Miracles. There would be like 10, 15 people there. But I was just so happy. And I was a temporary secretary during the week, and I just lived for these lectures. And I combed the book with, fine-tooth combed, and I so prepared, and I remember what I wore in my first lecture. I couldn't tell you what I wore at any lecture my entire career, but I could tell you what I wore that first lecture. And then she called me that afternoon and said, it's like it was yesterday, she called me that afternoon and said, would you like to do it every week? And I was just over the moon. The last thing I was thinking of was that you could make a living doing this, because there wasn't a career doing this. Maybe you would ask if people gave, I think we asked for a suggested donation of $3. And I started giving these lectures. Now, I moved to Los Angeles in 1983. Before I moved from Houston to Los Angeles, I do remember having a phone call with a friend who said of a family, I'm a woman. Other things, no, that's because I'm a Jew. And then ultimately, about 20 years ago, I thought, no, actually, it's because I'm from Texas. Just this sense of, why the hell not? Why the hell not? That's the high side of Texas. Why the hell not? Now, I don't have a sense that I have to describe to anybody here what's going on in this country. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, because at this point, this is not news to anyone. And I want to say right now, that of itself is different than 10 years ago. Because there are things which 10 years ago, I might say, perhaps not in a group like this, but just to an average American audience. And some people might go, I don't know, I think that's going a little far. I mean, I think it's not that bad. Those days are over. Those days are over. People get it now. People get it on the left, but people also get it on the right. This country is owned and ruled by corporations. Yeah. So when Lincoln stood on the battlefield at Gettysburg, and he said that the men who died there for the Union had given what he called their last full measure of devotion. That a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. It's perishing now. And we are not functioning as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We are governed as a country of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. And it is a matrix, and they are no different than the matrix of landed gentry in Old England. Insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big agricultural companies, big chemical companies, gun manufacturers, big oil and defense contractors, and banks. It is time for them to learn. And there's only one way that they can learn it, and that's through a revolution at the ballot box. And I hope that you'll join with me. They need to learn that in this day, in this generation, we want our country back. Now, when I say a great act of imagination, let's just imagine for a moment an America in which no one in this place tonight, but no one in this country even had to think about health care.
Like trans people.
Even had to think about it for themselves or for their children. You didn't have to think in terms of getting a job, well, this one gives me benefits versus another one that doesn't. There wouldn't be 1.3 million people rationing their insulin in this country. There wouldn't be anybody putting a GoFundMe page up on the internet to pay for a life-saving operation for themselves or for their children. That whole level of anxiety, that 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt, it wouldn't exist. And now as you imagine it, and you can just feel sort of the layers of stress that just start to fall off your shoulders, right? And now hear me when I say what, once again, you already know, but we almost don't even let it in. That vision that we just shared is true of every other advanced democracy in this country and more. We're the only advanced democracy that doesn't have universal health care. They tell us that it's very complicated. I'm here to tell you, it's not that it's complicated, it's that it is corrupt. And that's why you have people rationing their insulin. We don't need the insurance company middlemen. And we don't need the pharmaceutical companies to be jacking up insulin, which they don't even hardly pay anything for. And I want to tell you something else. I want to tell you about the University of Texas when I was your age. We had tuition-free college and tech school. University of Texas had such a system. University of California had such a system. University of Florida had such a system. But this malevolent strain of vulture capitalism will look for a profit center anywhere. It will put its tentacles wherever it can find some place where it can play people. And we're most easily played where we're desperate to have something. I'm desperate to get an education because I'm told that that's the way I'll be able to actualize my dreams. And now I'm sure I don't have to tell people in this space, tens of millions of Americans who come out of school. First of all, I have to tell you, when I think of my age, because I was young, I was in my 20s when I lived here. I can't even imagine what it would have been like in my 20s to carry tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt. Debt is crippling. It's crippling. But when you look at the $88 billion of medical debt in this country, and you look at the college loan debt that still is over $1 trillion, no wonder people's lives are falling apart. When you think of all the people who are in jobs that they don't love, but it's the only way, 2 people get out of college, they have good degrees, they're having good jobs, and they're still not working. Both parents are having to make a decision based on how they could possibly pay for their child care. And I'll tell you something, the carcinogens in our food, the PFAS in our water, what we've done to our earth, what we've done to our farming, the lack of reverence for food, for agriculture, how we've raped the earth, how we've decimated farming, chemicals in our pesticides that we know harm a child's brain. And I'll tell you something about those gun manufacturers. I'll tell you this much. If those mass shootings happened more at hedge fund managers' offices, we would have common sense gun laws by now. Right now, we have a president who loves to call himself the climate president, really, because he's made some very healthy investments in green energy in the climate, in the IRA. But this is the thing. It's not enough to just invest in clean energy. You've got to stop ramping up the dirty energy. And so this president, who has given more oil permits even than Donald Trump did, and who has approved the Willow Project, let me tell you something. I'm not worried as a Democrat that people are going to show up to vote for Donald Trump or any of them, so much as I am worried about people staying home, because I know a lot of people who will not vote for a president who approved the Willow Project. I would cancel it on day one. And the list goes on and on. The U.S. war machine, our need to cut off 20% of that budget. It's unnecessary. Right now, the 60 Minutes is doing more of an oversight of the Pentagon even than the U.S. Congress. But I think at this point, I've said enough. Not that I said anything you don't all already know. This is no longer an age or an era of data collection. We have the data. I might have given a little point here or there that you hadn't heard the number before. But once again, I didn't tell you anything you didn't already know. At this point, we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because I think any intelligent observer realizes we're headed for the iceberg. That iceberg could be biochemical, it could be biomedical, it could be nuclear, it could be climate catastrophe, it could be AI. There are so many ways. And in my opinion, if we give it to the corporatists in the Republican Party, then we're headed straight for that iceberg. If we give it to the corporatists in the Democratic Party, we're moving to the iceberg a little bit more slowly, and we'll hit it at a different angle. I think we need to turn this ship around. Now, you might say to me, how are we going to do that, Marianne? Well, each and every one of us has a part to play in that, just like the immune system in the body. Every cell is assigned through natural intelligence within the body. You to the brain, you to the pancreas, you to the lungs, you to the heart. And that's how civilization works. You through your natural intelligence, you be a lawyer, you be a healer, you be a doctor, you be a scientist, you be a teacher. Each and every one of us feel that yearning in our own hearts. But right now, we need to remember the function of the body, which is the immune system. And the immune system is what happens when the body's in trouble and the cells all gather at the wound because repair work needs to be done. And what we need to be now is the immune system of the body politic of the United States. Mahatma Gandhi was asked, who is the leader of the Indian independence movement? And he said, the small, still voice within. So on one level, you do what the heart within you tells you to do. You do what your spirit tells you to do. You do what your natural intelligence tells you to do. I'm not going to receive the information about what you're going to do. You're not going to receive the information about what I'm supposed to do. But some things we need to do together. And the problem that we have in this country is that we have been so atomized, and the economic situation particularly has so atomized us. $50 trillion over the last 50 years transferred, an enormous transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% of Americans, decimating our middle class, leaving the majority of people on some level of grasping just to make it, lives falling apart. We call it a mental health crisis. But we don't, because the system that will be willing to talk about the mental health crisis doesn't understand that that crisis is itself, or maybe they would understand, they don't want to acknowledge the crisis itself is a symptom, the cause of which so much is the economic anxiety which plagues so many people in this society day after day and month after month and year after year. We need a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average person. And it is not going to happen until we, and unless we as a generation stand up and say, as our ancestors said, enough of that now. That shit's not going to happen about here anymore. Now, is electing a president who is willing to lay it down and say these things the silver bullet that's going to make everything perfect right away? Absolutely not. The president does not have a magic wand, nor should they. However, if you have a president, like Roosevelt was a president, who was willing to stand up to what he called the economic royalists, who was not trying to have it both ways, who was not going to have a Department of Defense secretary who was a former board member at Raytheon, who was not going to give more oil drilling permits, even than Trump did, who was not going to allow for corporate capture, where people like big agricultural executives were in the agriculture department, who was not going to allow in all these corporate executives to poison and advocate and take over these agencies that are meant to advocate for your safety, for your health, for your well-being. Instead realizes that no, short-term corporate profits should not be placed before the safety and the health and the well-being of the American people. Our bottom line, Adam Smith, who was the primary architect of free market capitalism, said free market capitalism cannot exist outside an ethical context. This capitalism today, this what I'm talking about here, the one that is governing, that is tyrannizing this country, this is not free market capitalism. This is a vulture capitalism. And let me tell you something about that form of capitalism, or any form of capitalism. It is not God. It is not God. And we do not bow down to an economic system. And economics should not be our governing principle. Humanitarian and democratic values should be our governing principle. And while I'm not saying that a president who is willing to say those things is going to fix everything automatically, I am saying it would be a beautiful thing. It would be a really beautiful thing. And it is needed. Because what has happened, especially since Citizens United, is that our government has been turned into a system of legalized bribery. And we have legislator after legislator, president after president, Supreme Court justice after Supreme Court justice, governor after governor, who do more to serve the short-term profit maximization goals of their donors than to serve the safety and the health and the well-being of their constituents, even when those constituents have made it clear time after time after time what they want, and any human being can see what they need. Republicans as well as Democrats, the majority want universal health care and Medicare for all. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want tuition-free college and tech school. It is time for us to cancel those college loans because they should never have existed. The majority of Americans, Republicans as well as Democrats, even gun owners, want common sense gun safety laws. But we need people who are in there who are not owned by those people. That system can do nothing for me. I'm not like, oh, well, if I go against the corporatist leadership, then I'm not going to have my place on the Appropriations Committee anymore. And they might primary me. And right now I have the speaker's cell phone. I'm not part of that. I'm not impressed by that. And I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something, and you're not supposed to say this when you're running for president, but I think it's important because I think in this case it's an important part of what I'm offering. I just want